There were key outcomes around catalyzing investment for climate innovation. There was a big conversation around the need to stimulate private capital globally to be able to catalyze climate innovation and industry across Africa. There were great significant feedback from COP28. One of the feedback I see was the need that there was a requirement to accelerate investment in climate innovation. There's still a need for Africa to get a bit of resourcing, and a lot of resources, not just a bit, to be able to tackle climate change. My name is Oluseun Onigbinde. I'm the director for BudgIT. I'm an Africa Climate Ambassador for 2023. Before starting BudgIT, my current organization, I had some previous experience leading Green Act. It was a climate and sustainability organization, so I've been significantly interested in this. My interest recently has been around accountable climate finance and also mobilizing global capital in very innovative ways to really tackle climate change and to be able to also ensure that Africa gets a fair share of climate financing across the world. So it's a pleasure, it's an honor to do this as an Africa Climate Ambassador. I believe that climate change is a threat to Africa and also presents an opportunity. My key role is to ensure that we have the required finance in an accountable manner to be able to engage with it effectively. Yeah, it was a great gathering. A bit of honor to be part of it in Nairobi, and it was a gathering of leaders, thinkers, doers, enthusiasts around climate change and sustainability. And it was a place to have a conversation about how Africa gets a fair share in the conversations around climate change. A whole lot of people will look into Africa and they would believe that our pollution or our emission is minimal, and definitely we do not matter in those conversations. But Africa, we share the same space. We are all bounded within the same atmosphere. So it's also important that Africa has a strong voice in global climate conversations. And those voices can't be in disparate forms. They can be fragmented. We must coalesce our voices towards accelerating climate action. So it was a summit that was held to accelerate climate action across Africa, and for Africa to present a common and a united front on the multiple threats of climate change, and also for Africa to also recognize that there's significant opportunities within climate action, and Africa needs all the support required. There were key outcomes around catalyzing investment for climate innovation. There was a big conversation around the need to stimulate private capital globally to be able to catalyze climate innovation and industry across Africa, so that Africa is just not another consumer of climate innovation, but we also could develop and build solutions that are relevant to either mitigate or adapt to the effects of climate change. But also a big conversation outcome around stimulating innovative public-private partnerships, understanding that public institutions continue to face mounting challenges of debt, of collapsing fiscal prices, of inflation. There's a need for them to build partnerships with the private sector and be able to stimulate and grow climate investment. So I believe that those were one of the major things that were the outcomes from the Africa Climate Summit. Yeah, I mean, I've only attended just one COP, and somehow it feels like a big talk show, but I don't think it is. The Conference of Parties, which is you take the acronym and you call it COP. It's a gathering of leaders within the climate sphere, if you allow me to use that word, to really brainstorm about how we deal with issues of climate injustice, climate resources, and also about how we also build some certain level of standards around adaptation and mitigation. So the climate COP has been a place where people discuss issues around loss and damage of biodiversity, loss and damage of critical infrastructure or even social injustice. and where we expect that developed countries who have been a major contributor to emissions based on their defective or fossil fuel-led industrializations, also be able to pay a fair share to developing countries that have brought the brunt of climate change. So it's a place for conversation and to be able to exact commitment across board for me, the developed and developing countries, around climate change and adaptation, specifically on adaptation and sustainability. It's effectively managed by the UNFCCC, which is the United Nations organ that is responsible for climate change and also coalition interest around these issues. There were great significant feedback from COP28. One of the feedback I see was the need that there was a requirement to accelerate investment in climate innovation. There were big conversations around the fact that current investment vehicles were not adequate, were too fragmented, and there was a need to build, to have a conversation. How do you accelerate investment for climate change? And another thing was also the connection of climate change to other multilateral issues that developing countries face. Issues of aid, reform, issues of public debt, even issues of fiscal crisis that states are beginning to face, and how climate investments can mitigate some of these challenges. Also, there was the conversation on the loss and damage fund and the need for them to accelerate investment into those kind of vehicles. So it felt like it was an extension to further discuss on the Paris Agreement. But most of the thinking I'm saying is that the COP28 in Dubai was big on the fact that there's need for accelerated investment in climate change, and that's to be done with a high level of urgency. I think it does. I think it did. I think specifically, I think ACS was important because when we go to climate change summits, COPs in different years, we've not been able to effectively mount and present a common front. And I'm happy that that conference happened. Africa was able to say clearly and boldly what he wanted, that he needed to receive every level of support. And not just support, he needed to also be able to deal in a very fair, in a very, very secure, in a very equitable environment as much as possible. I mean, those conversations spilled over to issues around the IDA, around aid, around public debt, around also trade, illicit financial flows. So, I mean, it also shows that most of these issues are intersectional. So it was a great success in my own view. I believe that it's also a beginning of many things to come, because there's still a need for Africa to get a bit of resources, and a lot of resources, not just a bit, to be able to tackle climate change. The carbon market are still unfair to Africa. The investment flow, Africa still gets very little percentage out of that. So it's also important that conversations are held about half of Africa also has a bigger share in all of this conversation. I mean, it's on both sides. Africa doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to carry, we don't have to feel sorry for Africa. I mean, in a way, we can't just sit and feel like, oh, things are going bad, climate change threats. This is an opportunity to also build innovation. Innovation that is effective, that is usable, that is scalable across the entire continent. So I see climate change as a threat. The landslides, the irregular precipitation, the droughts, the overflooding, the flooding, and different things that have happened over the years. I think that those ones remain threats, and there's a whole lot of injustice in those of that kind of environment, but also creates an opportunity. So Africa must also treat climate action as an opportunity to build ideas, new ideas in renewable energy, in energy efficiency, to build new thinking also in material use, to build new thinking in industrializations, green manufacturing, green housing. And those are the things that should propel Africa going forward. That it's sad that we continuously face threats of climate change, and we bear one of the biggest brunt, in terms of climate change. But it's also a chance to understand that this represents a period in mankind to really accelerate innovation, and Africa cannot be left behind at all. And that's why climate financing is critical. And climate financing in a very accountable and a very equitable manner would be extremely important to how Africa moves forward from this point. Africa's greatest challenge to climate action, for me, it's getting the right financing to be able to either mitigate the challenges or to adapt to the issues. We still look at the fact that less than 5% of investment related to climate change, climate action is put in Africa. We still have a carbon market where African units are priced far below the European counterparts. And we don't have a robust, developed carbon market, where Africans can be able to tap effectively and also be able to, adapt or mitigate to some of these challenges. So I think Africa needs major challenge an equitable financing mechanism, where Africa gets a fair share of what it should get based on the fact that it faces climate challenges, and also Africa also being able to stimulate private, public, and multilateral investment to be able to tackle some of these challenges head on and also innovate out of it. So I think financing is our biggest problem. How we do what we call follow the money. Africa should receive much resources to be able to innovate or to be able to tackle some of these challenges. Yeah, Africa can do much more better. And I think it's just about, it's going to happen in the spirit of what we saw at the ACS, which is coming together, carrying a common front, carrying a common voice, and ensuring that we are able to recognize our challenges and also understand why we need to excite innovation. Africa has a young population, and there's a whole of dynamism and innovation that can be developed out of that. So it's also important that as we talk about that, we want to build mechanisms for biodiversity, for climate change, for renewable energy, and all of that. We must effectively bring a common front. And the common front to be able to talk about that. The current financing framework does not suit Africa, does not work for Africa. We need to be dealt with high level of agency, with understanding that we require resources to actually scale impact and to also be accelerate innovation. Africa, one is to first, being able to build a common front. And I think Africa also has to understand that internally, domestically, they need to show high interest. So I would expect that we build a robust climate finance desk within African countries and even at the African Union. So there has to be a multilateral move for something like an Africa Climate Bank. I think we're due for something like that. We also have to figure out how to now raise a multilateral fund within the African space. We have the World Bank chips in something, the IAFDB chips in something, but that's not enough. It's not enough for the scale of what we do in Africa. So Africa also needs to raise a new basket, that every fund can be poured into. I think that's extremely important. So we need some rich Pan-African fund that is specifically targeted towards climate adaptation, mitigation, and innovation. I also believe that Africa needs to build models, new private-public partnership models that understands the current challenges that we face around low income, and also those models will be wired around building access to energy. Those models could be about access to food, developed in a much more sustainable manner. Access to health, there's an intersection of climate and health on that manner. So Africa also, it's also a time for innovation to happen, and that innovation will happen when it's co-created by the private sector and the public sector. So these models have to be developed, and we know that Africa still faces major, basic challenges of energy, food, housing, and this is the chance for us to really build innovative things that can meet those challenges. So we could call it the fourth industrial revolution, and whatever we want to put that, but our buckets we want to put that, but Africa must be at the heart of it. Well, World Bank has the structures to do that, but it has to be done from an accountable perspective because there are fears I mean, one.org had a report recently that chronicled cases of greenwashing, abuse of climate funds. And it's also very important that World Bank set up a lateral, multilateral, multi-stakeholder framework for accountability for the loss and damage fund. I don't think there's a problem with multilateral institutions doing it, but if it's going to be, if the World Bank has to do this, it has to do it in proximity with frontline leaders within the African environment. And it's extremely important that a high level of accountability in terms of effective use of these resources is brought forward. So, because we've seen a whole lot of World Bank resources being put in developing countries, sometimes they come with some optimal outcomes because there's no effective oversight or integration within the civil society. So it's very important that as we develop new models to really mitigate or adapt to climate change, we rethink the multi-stakeholder framework that would underline them. I mean, for years we've not done them right. I think it's also time that those civil society, interest group, accountability groups are brought inside this framework so that they can actually advise the World Bank and being able to spotlight abuse or waste in any situation. So, and if they also have to listen to developing countries who would be the recipient of this fund and make sure that it's done in a localized and in a proximate manner. I mean, it takes us forward because no two cups are the same. But I mean, with the loss and damage fund, it takes us forward to be able to, for people to be able to articulate the challenges that the climate change presents, and to be able to get resources to either mitigate that or to adapt to that specifically. And I think what has to be done is that ideas have to be brought forward, and all ideas are valid. But the framework of administering that loss and damage fund has to be in a collaborative manner. It has to be in a co-creation manner. There is enough evidence with like the OGP that sets up the co-creation mechanism for governance. So there's a lot of learning in that kind of framework that Africa can take from the loss and damage. Because it's not just about funding Africa. It's also about making sure that the resources are put into the places where they are most needed. The most challenged environments, the most underserved environments get these resources. And I think that's what it has to be. So equity has to be on the table, accountability has to be on the table, and efficiency has to be on the table. And I think those are going to be my own key principles around it. Getting the resources to where it's most needed, where it's most required, ensuring that we're able to have a feedback mechanism around the use of the fund that is well protected and well respected, and also ensuring that the resources in the fund are effectively spent. So I think Africa also needs to create an accountability, a governance dynamics around this fund. So it doesn't look like, we're giving all that money to Africa, but we don't see any difference. So I believe that the ACS, the African Union, should set some governance framework around the use of these funds within the African continent. Climate change represents a threat, to Africa's growth significantly because Africa continues to pull itself up, but global macroeconomic dynamics and climate change and some of these issues that Africa has no single or no sole responsibility for continuing to deter its growth. So, climate change is a big threat to Africa. In fact, you could say in the long run, it's the biggest threat to Africa because within climate change, there's an opportunity for conflict. Nigeria is a big example where the Lake Chad, the shrinking of the Lake Chad has led to some pastoral and the agriculture and the farmers has led to this crisis, this farmer-idle clashes. So there's a great opportunity for increased conflict if we don't try to fix climate change issues. Also, it slows down growth effectively if people are not able to maximize output due to the effects of climate change. And also, we also have the challenges with effectively the environment. The environment comes up in a suboptimal way because we cannot farm properly. we cannot harvest properly, we cannot predict patterns and things like that. So I believe that it's a huge threat to Africa. When you now even now look at disaster risk and how much vulnerable most African countries are, then that's another bigger issue there. So I think Africa, it's a big conversation to be had, but with global environments there. Africa needs more support to be able to mitigate the crisis around climate change and to be able to adapt to it, most especially, because we could do all our best to mitigate. We are still small in terms of emission generation because of our industrial output is still relatively weak. But how do we adapt to the crisis? How do we adapt to the issues? This is where more funding, more support, as seen in the loss and damage fund, needs to be popped up, and more funding needs to come to Africa. African leaders need to come together, need to work in unity, need to partner together, and need to see climate change not as a threat solely, but as an opportunity to build innovation. It's also an opportunity to harness the dynamism, the intellectualism, and the boldness of African young people. And this is what we need. This audacity is what we need to create new things. We Africans can also be in the front line of climate innovation. A lot of countries, from the US to China to Europe, are in the race, to lead on climate innovation, resource efficiency, and sustainability. Africa also needs to tap effectively into that. And Africa needs to continue to sound that it needs a fairer share, a fairer opportunity to access finance and to be able to build new things that are sustainable in the long run. Thank you.